welcome back. My name's Diana. This is my channel Bookish Di, and today I am wrapping up my February and March in reading. So I decided last month that I was just going to do a joint wrap up for February and March because I didn't do a whole lot of reading in February. I was feeling really slumpy, and then I had a big work thing that I had to do that was taking up a lot of brain space, and then Horizon Forbidden West came out, and I really didn't feel like recording just to talk about 3 books. So I'm just combining the 2 months, and I now have 12 books to talk about instead of 3. So let's get into it. The first book I read in February was Shadow House Fall, written by Daniel Jose Older, narrated by Anika Noni Rose. This is the second book in the Shadow Shaper Cipher trilogy. It is a YA urban fantasy trilogy following Sierra Santiago, a teenage Puerto Rican girl living in Brooklyn, as she discovers her magical powers that's tied to her art and how it interplays with her family's history. So I had listened to the previous book in January and I liked it, and I decided to continue with the series. And this one I thought did an even better job of world building and raising the stakes for the characters. So one of the things that it's kind of like a joint complaint with this book as well as the first book is the first book really felt closed, like it didn't feel like it was the first book of a trilogy, whereas this book, it feels like it's kind of raising the stakes in a way that wasn't really teased out in the first book. So that's like my one major complaint for this book. Other than that, I really enjoyed the characters. So like I said, this book is dealing with the after effects of the first book. So Sierra has now started building her own crew of Shadow Shapers and is now trying to get them, used to their power and figuring out, what are we going to be doing in Brooklyn and how are we going to be interacting with the spirits. But it also deals with, gentrification, police brutality, white supremacy, and there's just all of these different things happening in this book. And I think Daniel Jose Older just does a fantastic job of intertwining them and making the stakes both personal as well as larger for Sierra and her crew. I think my one complaint with this book and kind of with this series as of now is the first book really read like a standalone. Like it read like the end of the book was kind of the ending point for Sierra and her friends, whereas this book starts raising the stakes and Sierra now has to deal with the consequences of what she did by taking up the power of La Lucera, as well as making the world a little bit more deeper and building the world's mythology. And it wasn't really hinted at in a way that I really like in my trilogy. So it feels like everything is just like happening all at once. But that's really my only criticism of this book. I thought that Daniel Jose Older does a fantastic job of writing Sierra and her friends. I found their voices to be really distinct, and I really love Anika Noni Rose's narration. I think she just does an amazing job, and that's why I've continued the series as audio, just because I really enjoy the production of them. I ended up giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'm hoping to finish this trilogy up soon, but as of now, I would really highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for something a little bit different for your YA fantasy. After that, I had a reread of Ashes of Honor by Shauna McGuire. This was for my ongoing October Day reread project with KJ and Renee on Fangirl Happy Hour. This is book 6 of the October Day series, and it deals with the consequences of what happens in book 5, where Toby is starting off in probably the darkest place that she is the entire series. So huge content warnings for suicidal ideation with this book, as well as child endangerment, kidnapping. But so Toby is not handling the end of book 5 well. This takes place about a year later, and she gets drawn back into the world of fairy once again, where one of her fellow knights with Duke Sylvester Torquil comes to her saying that his changeling daughter has disappeared and he wants Toby to help find her. This, I think, is probably one of my all-time favorite of the Toby books. I think that it does a really good job of, again, building off of what came before. This is kind of the book 3 pivotal moment. So with these books, every 3 books, there's like a pivotal thing, whereas every 4th book is a wham episode. So with this one, it's stuff that happens at the end, which I will not talk about for spoiler reasons, but it's Toby coming more to terms with her power and her place in fairy, as well as kind of some changes in her personal situation. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it, I can't remember if it was 4.5 or 5 out of 5. Anyway, really good. I know the series, if you have started reading the series, I know the first few books aren't necessarily great, but by the time you get here, I think it works out really, really well. And I'm really looking forward to the next book of my reread, which is Chimes at Midnight. The last book I read in February was Tastemakers. Please ignore the cat digging around in his food dish for no reason in the background. The last book I read in February was Tastemaker, 7 Immigrant Women Who Revolutionized Food in America by Mayuk Sen. This is a nonfiction kind of biography, kind of cultural history of the United States through food. And it follows 7 women immigrant women, as well as Julia Child, as kind of like a counterpoint, and going through their lives and the influence they had on America's culinary taste. So this ranges from and I'm completely blanking on names, but like the influence of Chinese food to Indian food to Italian to Mexican. And it's very interesting. It covers a lot of things that I didn't know, both about the woman that Sen chooses to profile, but as well as how the immigrant cultures and immigrant cuisines kind of intertwined with American history, and how some of the foods that we now see as kind of as fixtures in our society, like Indian food and Italian food and Chinese food, how they came to be, and how there are different ways, or like how different people approached those foods. So one of the things he talks about, particularly in regards to like Mexican food, is that there's been a history of Anglos or gringos going to Mexico and like reinterpreting that in the United States, and how and I'm forgive me, I'm completely blanking on names right now, how the woman he profiles approached it. Anyway, this was both very interesting and also a little frustrating, because each chapter is dedicated to a different woman, and I found the chapters a little short for my taste. I would have liked there to be a little bit more, and it's a relatively short book. It's only like 200 or some odd pages, and so this was one where I feel like there could have been more in-depth discussion. It felt a little surface level to me, and some of it is because some of these women, there just isn't a whole lot written about them, but others it's not the case. So I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think that it's a good starting point if you're interested about the history of food in America and learning about people that you might not have known about, but it just felt a little surface level for me. So that was February. Like I said, only 3 books, but I made up for that in March. I ended up reading 9 books in March, which is my best reading month in a while. I was kind of hoping for 10, but I got to the point by the end of March where I'm just like, I don't feel like reading anymore. I'm just gonna play Dragon Age and save up like reading brain for April and my really ambitious TBR. Anyway, I did enjoy most of the books that I read in March as well, so let's get into it. The first book I read in March was actually one I started in February, right before Horizon Forbidden West came out, and I never finished it in February because stress hyperfocus is real, and I played a lot of Horizon Forbidden West. Anyway, so that book is Dispensing with the Truth: The Victims, the Drug Companies, and the Dramatic Stories Behind the Battle Over Fen-Phen by Alicia Mundy. This is a nonfiction book going into the history of the diet drug Fen-Phen in the United States. So I had heard about this book through the podcast Maintenance Phase, It was one of their early episodes where Audrey Gordon was telling Michael Hobbs about this drug that had been introduced in the 90s and then recalled, called fen-phen, that boasted that it would help women technically people, it was really targeted towards women, that would help them lose weight, a significant amount of weight in like 3 months. And it turned out that the combination of this drug was causing some really severe heart problems. Even if you only took it for like a couple of weeks, it still had the potential to really mess up your heart. And so this book goes into that. It goes into the process of the FDA approving it, how people were trying to call attention to the problems that this drug posed, but how they were dismissed or overlooked. And it goes into the legal battles as well. So this book is actually relatively difficult to get a hold of. I think it's actually out of print. I was able to get it through interlibrary loan at work, and I'm very pleased with that because otherwise this would be out of reach for me. But I overall enjoyed it. I thought that it gave a very good, like I said, a good overview of what was going on at the time. So this book was written, it was released in 2001. I think it came out like right before 9/11, which might be kind of why it's faded a bit from the cultural memory. But so one of the things that I found really fascinating with this book is that it goes into how the drug was marketed and how it was sold, which bears a lot of like eerie resemblances to what was going on with Oxy that's been discussed at length in different books, including most recently, and I think like one of the more well-known, Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is a good book, by the way. I highly recommend it. And yeah, so like the whole like pill mills and, Speakers Bureau to promote the drug, like all of that was happening with this diet drug. And again, we just are at, I don't know, it's just interesting that we've seen history repeat itself. And this ties into another podcast that I've been listening to, I think like right before I started this book. The podcast Behind the Bastards did a two-part series on the FDA and how the FDA has changed from this watchdog group for the American public, excuse me, to an organization that says, the pharmaceutical companies are our customers, and we need to make our customers happy. And if that means not having great review processes for new drugs, then so be it. So yeah, this was just like, it tied in interesting ways to other media that I was consuming. And one thing I wasn't a huge fan of is the author is you can tell that the author is like really interested and relies a lot on the trial lawyers for the plaintiffs and the people suing the companies that made fen-phen and marketed fen-phen. And so there are times when like going through the legal process, it just felt like a little voyeuristic. And maybe that's just my personal taste with these types of nonfiction books. But for the most part, I thought it was really interesting, really informative. Like I said, it's interesting kind of draw connections between what happened in the past and what's happening now. So if you can get a hold of it, I would recommend this. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was very interesting. I thought that it helped put certain things in new light for me. And yeah, check out Maintenance Phase episode on fen-phen, as well as Behind the Bastards episodes on the FDA. I will do my best to remember to link them below as well. After that was another nonfiction book. I listened to Hood Feminism, Notes from the Woman That a Movement Forgot, written and narrated by Mickey Kendall. So this was the Community Read pick for March for Jess Owen's Community Read project. And I really loved this. So I've been aware of Mickey Kendall for a while, mostly through comics, because she's good friends with Gail Simone, who's one of my favorite authors and has worked with Gail on certain projects. And so that was how I became familiar with Mickey Kendall. So this is the first of her writing that I've read, and I really enjoyed it. So the premise of this book is to have a very intersectional look at feminism and look at things like education and how education is a feminist issue, at housing, at gun violence, at sexuality and sex ed, and all these different topics, some of which, you know, we do, like, mainstream feminism does consider important issues, but others that they don't. And Kendall gets into, you know, why they're really important to look at from this intersectional feminist lens, and how it's really important to listen to marginalized women, both racially, but also socioeconomically, for gender identity and sexual orientation. And yeah, I thought this was a really well-written book, really great, meaty topics to discuss. I definitely want to get a physical copy, similar to the reason I have a physical copy of The Sum of Us, because I do want to reread it and annotate it. This actually worked much better for me than mediocre. I thought that Kendall did a better job of laying out her arguments and tying it together, and I thought her point of view was more interesting than mediocre. And I think it was because she was looking at it from what are lessons that we can learn versus this is why things are not great. I don't know. This just worked for me better than the previous community read. I think I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Let me double check. Yeah, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it. I will say my one quibble, and this isn't necessarily with the content, but more of the audiobook production, was, and it might be because Mickey Kendall was narrating it and she's not a professional narrator, but there were times where the speed was very uneven. So because I was listening to it at a faster pace, it was just really noticeable when things would speed up versus slow down. So that's really my only quibble with this. Otherwise, I really enjoyed it. And look who is here, the little troublemaker himself. The next book I read in March was The Missing Page by Cat Sebastian. This is a historical mystery / romance, and it's the sequel to, I'm completely blanking on the name of the first book, but it's the second book in a series, Page and Summers, and it follows, it's set in post-war England, so like I think it's like 1946 or 1947, and it follows a doctor and a spy, and the doctor gets a letter from some family that he hasn't seen in a very long time, talking that his uncle had died and he's needed for a reading of the will, and it turns out it's dealing with the disappearance of his cousin decades earlier, and trying to find out what happened to her. So I enjoyed this. I really love Cat Sebastian's writing. I think she does really good romances. And this is a little bit different than her normal fare, because she normally does like one book follows the one couple, the next book follows a different couple. And this, I think, is her first series kind of following the same couple. Anyway, so in terms of the mystery, I would say don't necessarily go into this for the mystery, go into it for the relationship and kind of the exploration of how, like, being queer in this time period. And I can't really say more to that without it being spoilers, but part of it is dealing with Paige trying to figure out, like, does he continue being a spy? Does he not? Like, what does he do? And Summer's dealing with kind of the childhood trauma and dealing with, you know, who is he now versus who is he then, and how what happened with his missing cousin might have, how that influenced him. Anyway, I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.75 out of 5 stars. I love Cat Sebastian's writing. I enjoy the series, and I cannot wait to see if she continues it later on. Following that, I ended up listening to Henriks Fox, written by Lois McMaster-Bujold, narrated by Grover Gardner. I did have the physical copy checked out, but I was doing chores one day and I decided just to listen to it instead of reading it. And I enjoyed it. So this is chronologically the third Penrick and Desdemona novella. So this follows Penrick and his demon Desdemona, who are technically on vacation, and they get drawn into a murder investigation of another sorcerer and also trying to figure out what happened to her demon. So this novella kind of gets into more of a little bit of the world building, but it's also kind of going into like revenge and vengeance and what does that mean. So we see some people that we met in previous installments. So this picks up like a couple of years after Henrik and the Shaman, maybe like a year or so after Henrik and the Shaman. I can't. But yeah, so we follow some characters that we had previously met. We get some more delightful Henrik and Desdemona banter. I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5, like 4.25 out of 5 stars. There's not much else I can say. Yeah, I really enjoy this series. It's a lot of fun, and it's not the only one that I read in March. This little cat is quite demanding. So after Henrik and the Fox, I participated in the Magical Readathon Gear Up Challenge. So it was basically a week-long readathon where we read 2 books, one to get our Conduit and one to get our Order Legacy. So for me, my Conduit, I got The Orb, and that was read a book with Sun and the title are on the cover. So I finally read The Unconquerable Sun by Kate Elliott. So this is her most recent novel. It's a space opera that follows Princess Sun, and it is loosely inspired by the life of Alexander the Great. So in this book, Princess Sun, shortly after winning a stunning military victory, is dealing with kind of the fallout of that. And it also follows Persephone, who is a companion character to Sun, and how their lives end up intertwining. And there's a third perspective in this book that follows someone from the opposing empire, or the opposing intergalactic body to the empire that Sun's living in. So I really enjoyed this. I did find like the first like 15% to be really slow and a little info dumpy, but like once you make it past that, this book was nonstop. There's just so much happening in this book. I love the way Kate Elliott does characters and world building, and this didn't disappoint. I really enjoyed Sun. I enjoyed Persephone. I enjoyed the third POV character whose name I'm completely blanking on. And I thought this was a really good starting point for a new series. There's just so much happening, and you get a sense not just the conflict between 2 different governmental groups, but also the sniping and the politics that are happening within the place that Sun lives, and like what's going on with that. This book is, I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was really fun. I'm very excited for the sequel, which I'm hoping is actually coming out this year, but I don't know. It's called The Furious Heavens. So yeah, I gave this 4.25 out of 5 stars. Again, very much looking forward to seeing what happens next. And I'm doing a very bad job reviewing this book, but I would say if you're looking for a space opera that just has a lot of battles, competency porn, that type of stuff, pick this up. After that, I read a mystery. I read Homicide and Hollow Hollow by Mia P. Manansala. So this is the sequel to Arsenic and Adobo, which I read back in January. And this follows the continued misadventures of Layla and her life in Shady Palm. So this takes place like 6 months after the events of Arsenic and Adobo, and she and her best friend and her best friend's girlfriend are working to open their cafe, and Lila is still dealing with the after effects of what happened in the first book, and she also got roped into judging the Miss Teen Shady Palms beauty pageant, and then one of the judges turns up dead, and her cousin is arrested for it. So I, for the most part, enjoyed this. I thought that I really like the characters in this book. I really like kind of the family dynamic between Layla and her aunt and her grandma and her cousins. I love the food descriptions in this series so much. Once again, incredibly sad there's no Filipino food place near me because I would have gone there so fast. So that was fun. The mystery was fine. I don't really necessarily have complaints about the mystery. What I do have some complaints about is the pacing issue, and I think this was the same problem that I had with Arsenic and Adobo, where there wasn't, at least for this one, I didn't find that there was enough like signposts kind of leading you to the conclusion. Like it makes, like looking back, it does make sense, but I didn't find there to be enough kind of hints to put the pieces together beforehand like you could with Arsenic and Adobo. And I also, and this I think is my biggest complaint, found that the denouement was really rushed. So the confrontation with the murderer and kind of the revelation of who they are happens in the same, like that's smushed into the last chapter along with kind of like dealing with the fallout. And what I really would have liked that to be 2 different chapters. So you have, you know, the unmasking of the murderer, figuring out what their motives were and like, you know, bringing them to justice, but then also having a chapter to kind of work out the aftermath. And you really didn't have that. And so that just, it was a little letdown. It was a disappointing for me. And I felt it was even more noticeable in this one than it was with Arsenic and Adobo. So 3.75. I do plan on continuing with this series through the library. I have the 3rd book. I put in an purchase request for the 3rd book when it comes out later this year. So I will be reading that. If you're looking for a fun, diverse, cozy mystery series, I would recommend picking it up. Just there are some noticeable flaws with it. Next, this was also for the Magical Readathon, and I cannot remember what the prompt was, but it was basically a quick read. Or read a book in 4 or less sittings, and I listened to Masquerade and Lodi, written by Lois McMaster-Buchhold and narrated by Grover Gardner. This is one of the more, in terms of when it was published, recent Penrick and Desdemona novellas, but it is chronologically, internal chronological order, the 4th Penrick and Desdemona novella, and it is, Penrick is in the Venice-like town of Lodi, and he is, I think, just there to do some work, and he gets drawn into a mystery. He finds a demon that is ascendant and is trying to find the demon and his carrier, and also trying to figure out like what happened there. And he works with a Saint of the Bastards Order as well. So this was fun. It was not my favorite Penrick and Desdemona, but I found it to just be a good time. I like the world, like the glimpses that we get of this Venice-like city, Lodi. I like hearing more about like religious holidays in this world, and I liked the mystery, I think, a little bit better than some of the previous ones, but it was, like I said, not my favorite, but I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So the second to last book that I read in March was The Bone Spindle by Leslie Vedder. This is a YA fantasy novel that is like gender bent Sleeping Beauty meets Indiana Jones. So it follows Fee, who is our Indiana Jones character. She's a treasure hunter. She's dealing with a curse from an ex, and who doesn't believe in true love. We have Shane, who is kind of our rough and tumble character. She's from the far north. She has a big axe, and you know, she's not in it for your revolution. She's in it for the money. And so she and Fee team up to investigate this mysterious ruin, and Fee pricks her finger on a bone spindle and gets tied into the legend of Prince Briar Rose, who is the prince from a neighboring kingdom who's been asleep for 100 years. And so Fee and Shane are off to free him and maybe end the curse. So this was a lot of fun. So I definitely had some issues with like the pacing, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought that Fee and Shane's dynamic were really great. Like, yes, there are romantic subplots for Fee and Briar Rose, and as well as Shane and this young woman that she meets, Red. But I found the more compelling relationship to be between Fee and Shane, because they're each bringing their own baggage and trauma with past relationships. With Fee, romantic relations with an emotionally abusive ex, and Shane dealing with her family and just the expectations placed on her. And so seeing them like let down their walls and become partners and friends was just really great. Yeah, the romances didn't really do it for me. I was mostly here for the friendships, and the friendships really worked for me. I found the world building to be interesting. There were some places where I thought it could be a little bit more developed, but I liked the basic premise of it. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a lot of fun. I definitely plan on picking up the sequel. And I'm definitely interested to see what happens based on how book 1 ended. And then the last book that I read in March was Paybacks, a Witch by Lana Harper. This is a sapphic contemporary fantasy romance, and it follows Emmy Harlow, who is a witch, and she had left her town after a really bad breakup with town fuckboy Gareth. Was it Gareth? Yeah, it's Gareth. And she leaves for Chicago and is kind of trying to distance herself from her family and her magical heritage, but she's called back for this magical competition in her town called the Gauntlet. And when she gets back, she finds out that local fuckboy Gareth has not only broken her heart, but the heart of her best friend Lyndon, as well as fucked over noted bad girl Talia. And so they team up to try and fuck over Gareth during the Gauntlet and try and keep him from claiming the town's power. And along the way, Emmy finds herself falling in love with Talia. So I had heard good things about this book, and I lucked out where I was finally able to grab it from my library, and I really liked it. I enjoyed the world building. I thought that the Thistle Grove, just like kind of the background of Thistle Grove, was very interesting, and what's going on with like the 4 major families. One thing I really liked about this is that magic isn't necessarily tied by blood. So like, yes, there are families that have magical powers, but like when you marry into the family, you also tend to get magical powers. So it's not like exclusively by blood, which I thought was interesting. I liked the relationship between Talia and Emmy, as well as between Emmy and her friend Lyndon, as well as her family. I would have liked a little bit more development of Emmy's relationship with her family. Like, I feel like we're told but not shown, particularly with Emmy and her relationship with her cousin Delilah, because I think that some of the drama around that relationship didn't work quite as well for me as like the romantic relationship between Emmy and Talia. However, I did enjoy it. I gave it like between 3.75 to 4 stars, and it's definitely one series I plan on continuing. The second book, From Bad to Cursed, is coming out in May. And I've requested my library buy it, so hopefully I will be reading it soon. But yeah, this was fun. I would say if you're looking for just a romantic witchy book that is sapphic, definitely pick this up. A lot of fun. And I'm very interested to see what comes next with this romance series. So that was my February and March in reading. One month I definitely read more than the other, but for the most part, no major bombs. I'm still enjoying most of what I'm reading. I think I've been doing a good job of picking things out. And you have a visitor from the other kitten. She's like, unhand me. Anyway, so yeah, any of these books sound interesting? Have you read any of these books and have opinions on them? Are you also a little sad that you don't have your own little demon Desdemona? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.